Hi, today I will be talking about resilience opportunities in Arctic Indigenous Peoples food systems, which I have to say is a favorite topic of mine. The Arctic is of course the homeland for a wide diversity of indigenous peoples that represent a diversity also of cultures, of languages, of food cultures, food traditions and food systems. And I myself work primarily with reindeer herding peoples, that is to say the nomadic indigenous peoples of the Arctic, which are spread across 10 national states, 24 different indigenous peoples in all, representing an original civilization also of the Arctic. And while the Arctic is our homeland, and it also differs to some extent. Some people talk about the different Arctics, the North American Arctic, the European or Scandinavian Arctic, and the Russian Arctic, and how they may differ. But we could also talk about, which is my topic, the indigenous Arctic. And the fact of the matter is, as we can see, that our homelands in the north are changing in unprecedented ways in the long histories of Arctic indigenous peoples. When we look at reindeer herding, for instance, some reindeer herders in Scandinavia have experienced above 3 degrees warming on seasonal spring pastures the last 30 years. If we go to eastern Siberia, it's above 6 degrees. And this in combination with land use change is shows quite a dramatic change picture in the north. I like to use this map, which shows the northern sea routes as the ice is retreating from the Arctic Ocean. And that is also a case topic for you later. But I also like to show this picture to highlight the global importance, the role of the Arctic in the global system, so to speak, which of course represents the combination of change drivers in the Arctic and this coming on top of many other challenges that our societies and communities are already facing, makes this as unprecedented challenges for our communities. On the other hand, it's also true that change means both challenges and opportunities, both negative impacts and positive possibilities. And however, our societies are often in not such a great position when it comes to exploiting these positive changes occurring. We have to spend a lot of time, energy and resources, our capacity, on struggling with the negative impacts of Arctic change. And so we're, figuratively speaking, running next to the bicycle. And this is a challenge for you as our future leaders, as resilience should also be about opportunities. We also have to find ways in which we can draw upon and utilize the opportunities of a changing Arctic. And a main question for you today and in this training course is how we can maintain and develop robust societies, which is another way of saying how can we maintain resilient societies. And of course, central here we think is that we must use our own knowledge. The traditional indigenous knowledge of Arctic indigenous peoples could be seen as the very foundation upon which our cultures, our livelihoods, our traditions, our very existence have been formed. And so it should not surprise anyone that this also needs to be part of our path into the future. But when are we really vulnerable? When are we not robust? In some ways, we are most vulnerable when we are not able to or not allowed to use our own knowledge to cope with the situation we're facing. And so the focus on traditional indigenous knowledge is key. And to put that further into context, of course, indigenous peoples have many ways to adapt to climate change, to land use change, to globalization in the Arctic, based on our traditional indigenous knowledge. In the case of reindeer herders, we could talk about ways in which we design our reindeer herds, ways in which we utilize the landscape. And of course, now for my talk today, we will focus especially on the indigenous food systems. And given these rapid and profound changes we can observe and that we expect in the future, how can we best secure our futures for the coming generations? Thinking that not all of us could or should convert into becoming miners or oil and gas workers, etc. Nor could we, even if we wanted to, ignore the world around us, because the changes taking place are so pervasive, so foundational that they will impact us, whichever way we turn. So could there be another way of developing? Could we have another type of development based on our own knowledge, our own resources, our own people, our own youth? In other words, based on our own terms. And we believe this to be possible, and we believe that one way forward is to have a closer look at our food systems. Because the food resources in the Arctic, for a number of reasons, are quite special, very special. And the knowledge about food resources, raw materials, conservation, preparation, among our peoples is also very deep. And this traditional indigenous knowledge is in use every day. But it's not much used outside our own societies, our own subsistence economies and so on. It's not used very much in economic development of our areas. And so this is the topic of a current project that we are working with in the Arctic Council, which is called ICR. And ICR is, as some of you know, the Sami term for a herd, or more precisely a reindeer herd, which is a foundation for the food system of reindeer herders. And so we want to turn this around and investigate and look at how we could use our knowledge and food cultures to utilize it to strengthen our adaptation, to strengthen our resilience. And in a way, the broader focus of this project and our efforts on food is focused on trying to achieve food sovereignty to a larger degree for Arctic indigenous peoples. And this involves our rights as indigenous peoples to determine our own food systems, to produce food our own ways, the traditional ways, or any way which we choose, and to secure, to bring food security to our peoples. And as our project has progressed, we made also a report to the Arctic Council Ministerial Meeting in 2017. You could see the cover here. It was made by a group of over 50 indigenous youth from all over the Arctic, working together to document their food traditions, their food knowledge, food culture, recipes, and food systems. And this was made into a report, a book that was presented for the ministers. And I think it's a wonderful recognition of the work of our youth and the depth of the food knowledge, the understanding, deep understanding of food of Arctic indigenous peoples, that this book won the prize for the best food book in the world in 2018 at the International Gourmand Awards held in China. And it did so in competition with 1,372 books from 116 nations, national states. So a wonderful recognition indeed of our youth and their work and their knowledge. But if we were to look further into the topic of innovation, you will be learning about social innovation in this training course. I will focus on innovation in the economic sense, meaning developing new products, new businesses. And I would like to show you a couple of examples of past innovations that are very famous in the European, or should I say world, food markets. You have the Parma ham and the Parmesan cheese of Italy, which are widely recognized and highly priced food artifacts on the global markets today. But what are these products? These products were not invented by the food industry. These products are very old, traditional handicraft products. Products that have been revitalized and adapted to markets of today. And indeed, doing this, revitalizing traditional food productions for modern markets is a very good way to build value added, to build innovation. Because innovation, it's about something new, yes, but innovation can also be to combine known things in new ways. This means that we foresee a great potential to have similar processes in the Arctic with the food products and food traditions of Arctic indigenous peoples. However, some things are easier than others, and it's also true that some things are easier said than done. The experience from Scandinavia, for instance, when it comes to reindeer products, is that it's relatively easy to increase value added, or the price, if you will, for reindeer products. That's not the most difficult challenge. The harder challenge is to do this in a way that actually benefits the primary producers, in this case the reindeer herders. And so value added is one thing, but value grabbed is something else. And this relates to different things, but ways around this may be looking at fair trade systems. But also we cannot escape the fact that in order for this to succeed, we have to do ourselves. We have to do this ourselves, develop our own products, our own businesses. Here also we rapidly experience some challenges in regulatory frameworks where food regulations are not always adjusted to Arctic realities, and the practice of these regulations are not adjusted to our food systems, to say the least. But we have thought of some measures to get around this, and one measure that we are now working with to try to overcome these challenges and inspire indigenous peoples, reindeer herders, other indigenous peoples in the Arctic, is to build a new type of food lab, where the focus is on accelerating and stimulating innovation, development of new products, new markets, and new businesses. And it basically looks like this. It's a simple construction. This is a kitchen, but more so it's a Bocuse d'Or competition kitchen, a standardized kitchen for use in the Bocuse d'Or competition. Bocuse d'Or is, of course, the most famous and prestigious competition in the world for chefs. So it's a world championship or Olympics for chefs, you could say. And so by having such an infrastructure in the Arctic, we wish to attract the best chefs, not necessarily for them to teach us how to cook, but as much the other way around. But we also want to stay true to ourselves, and so we're going to do our competition kitchen nomadic, meaning that we will construct it in a way that it can be transported by car, perhaps more importantly by snow machines, into the tundra, into the living food system of reindeer herders and other indigenous peoples. We also wish to stay true to ourselves in terms of our traditions. And so we wish to also have, as part of our FoodLab, our traditional reindeer herding tent that is found all over among other indigenous peoples too. And so by integrating and combining these different worlds, if you will, we will on the one hand have a very modern Bocuse d'Or competition kitchen with lots of steel and glass, very, very modernized, so-called. On the other hand, we will also have the setting of our traditional food systems inside the tent and outside of it, where the traditional indigenous knowledge is at the core. And so we have an axis where we can move back and forth to experiment, learn and be inspired, and understand things in new ways. Also combining known things in new ways, hence innovation. And this is the purpose of this innovation accelerator, to stimulate such processes. We have a group of architects that were the ones that also drew Noma, if you've heard of this very famous restaurant in Copenhagen. And this is how we together have envisioned this to look. I'll try to duck a little bit to see if you could have the full view of it. Our goal, as said, is to increase resilience and adaptation by stimulating innovation. And this is supposed to be also a mechanism for youth, indigenous youth. And we would very much like to invite you all to take part in the further development of this and to take part in using it once we are able to realize it. We also wish to stay true to ourselves in terms of, let's say, our philosophy. And Arctic indigenous peoples have philosophies about food that differ, we conceive, from other peoples. So as a foundation, you should take only what you need. You should use everything, utilize every bit, and share what you have. And on this plate, you see this enacted. On this plate, we have tried to use many parts of the reindeer in this case, which is not so commonly used in the so-called modern value chains, in the modern economy. Because reindeer herding was always a circular economy. Arctic indigenous peoples have represented the best functioning part of the circular economy historically. And now the world is following on. Now everyone looks to be circular and sustainable and so on. But again, we also have some challenges in that most of what you see on this plate, according to the practice of food regulations in most countries, is illegal, dangerous, or so they say. Of course, this is the food that our ancestors have provided for us, being brought down from generation to generation. So opinions differ. But in fact, when we look at current food trends, it's quite interesting that indigenous peoples' food systems align amazingly well with the international trends now. For instance, sustainability, organic food, the origins of food, the genuine food, health aspects of food, the, let's say, wild food, even though we are not so fond of the word wilderness, which to us means, of course, homeland. But also roots and ethnicity are trends in the international, on the international food scene. And it's quite interesting when we dive into this, if we look at consumer attitudes towards Arctic products and Arctic indigenous foods, what we find is that if you identify, for instance, example from Canada, seafood produced by indigenous peoples, this is very attractive for customers. It increases the probability that customers will buy this product. And that goes across all types of consumer segments. So it's quite interesting, this. And again, other studies from Canada by our colleague Dave Natcher indicates that one very important consumer motivation to buy and the willingness to pay a price premium is connected to the indigenous origin of food. There are others as well, you know, the clean Arctic and so on and so forth. But clearly, indigenous food sells. And this, they have looked at this in terms of Arctic char and other things, and it's quite clear that this is an area with potential. However, not all customers are so accustomed to, are not so familiar with Arctic food products, nor Arctic indigenous food products. So certification programs may be also important, which is also what our youth proposed in the ICR project in 2017. And so it should be no surprise that customers are willing to pay for these foods, because as our youth's received prize shows, our food traditions, our food culture can be and is the best in the world. So, but to translate that then, what does this mean for you as future leaders? What does this mean for our societies? This is another leadership challenge for you to think about. To round off, I will say that it's central to anyone, any society, any civilization, to use its own knowledge to develop itself. And so we must also use our own knowledge to develop our own societies. And at the core of this is our food systems developed over centuries and millennia, with our food culture and knowledge and our historical food sovereignty. And there is good reason to think about accelerating, enhancing innovation to build resilience and adaptation, to increase value added, to increase and strengthen the economic base of our peoples, societies, communities, and also to understand that what we have is also can be competitive advantages versus other types of food. And of course, using our envisioned FoodLab in this regard will be one step in this direction. Also, we need to secure that this development, whatever development we have, is made on our own terms. That it's based on our own resources, our own peoples, our own youth, and our own knowledge. And we cannot get around that we have to do things ourselves. We have to transform the opportunities of a changing Arctic into real opportunities also for our societies. And in a way we could say that our choice is to transform or to be transformed. We believe that our human and natural resources have the capacity to enable food sovereignty, food security, and to build our economic base of our peoples for the future. But a leadership challenge for you is how we could, first of all, deal with the negative impacts of a changing Arctic. But here, more importantly, how we could also get in position to exploit the opportunities that comes from an Arctic that is rapidly changing, because there are a few opportunities here, and how to do that on our own terms. Because we think this is the way to ensure our futures in face of the unprecedented and historic changes we can now observe all over the Arctic. And this is the only way, we think, to make sure that an opportunity of a changing Arctic indeed is an opportunity for everyone.